Hi, I'm Andrew Miller, and I'm here to talk about peer review for respiratory care. A little bit about me. I am the section editor for respiratory care. I've also been a reviewer for over 20 journals, and I'm an author of over 25 manuscripts. And why is peer review important? So when we ask you to peer review a paper, we really want you to evaluate the scientific merit of the paper. And each manuscript has already been screened by our editorial office um, to make sure that it's suitable for peer review. And we select reviewers based on your expertise in a certain area. So we selected you because you're an expert in the topic that we ask you to review. And then our goal is to evaluate the current work for its suitability for publication, but also to help authors learn so they can do better in the future. So we have to be careful about having too harsh of a review because this can dampen authors' enthusiasms, especially for those that are just starting out. So you'll be invited by email, and then after you accept the invitations, you'll get more specific email instructions from our editorial office. You need to accept the invitation within 3 days. If it's not your area of expertise, feel free to decline. Feel free to contact us and say, this paper isn't well suited to me, but I'd be happy to review a different paper that's more in line with your areas of expertise. And then if you're unavailable, we really appreciate alternative reviewers. We're always trying to grow our reviewer database. So if you have any mentees or junior faculty or fellows that you think would be well suited to review for us, we really appreciate alternative reviewers. And then most importantly, if something comes up, especially during these crazy times, we totally understand that things come up unexpectedly. And if you can't get your review done on time, just let us know and we can wait on your review. Or if it's going to be a significant delay, we can just remove you and find somebody else. It's very frustrating for us as an editorial office when we email and we don't get a response back from the reviewer. So what to do? So this is what I do, and this is what, generally what we ask reviewers to do is we want to make sure that you read the manuscript at least once, maybe more than once. So what I personally do is I do one quick kind of read through and then make some kind of mental notes, and then I'll go back through in detail to kind of think about specific points that I want to point out to the authors about things that they can improve or things that I found difficult to understand, or if there's any major concerns with the paper. And then we want to make sure that we're kind, honest, professional, and constructive. So think about this in terms of if you were giving feedback to a junior faculty member or a mentee, try to keep it in kind of in that context and try to be kind-hearted because the goal here is to help them improve their manuscript, not to beat them up. And then we also want to consider the quality of the writing. So we're getting an increased number of submissions from countries where the authors have English as a second language. So if the English science writing is poor, request that the authors work with either experienced authors with an English science writing, or sometimes even request that they use translation services or some other service to help the paper be more readable. And then we want to make sure we go through each section very carefully to look for missing references, make sure that they've clearly stated their hypothesis, that everything makes sense so that a reader can understand exactly what the authors are trying to do, and then evaluate the statistics to the best of your ability. So we don't expect every reviewer to be an expert on statistical analysis. Analyses are becoming more and more complex, so it's totally reasonable to ask for an external statistical review or get clarity from a colleague, but make sure that if you do ask for clarity from a colleague that you get permission from the editorial office before you do that. And then actually writing the review. So what I do, and I think what most reviewers do, is they actually get a Word document and they'll type up their concerns in the Word document and then cut and paste it into the box when you actually file the review. I usually like to create bullet points, but you can also use a numbering system. And what you want to do is break the comments into a sentence or two that the reviewers can, or the authors can then respond to a little bit easier. So it's a little bit easier to respond to bullet points in the author's response than it is to respond to a long paragraph. And then you can also create subsections, so you can say introduction, and then any concerns you have for that section, the abstract, same thing, methods, etc. And that can kind of help the authors respond as well. And then try to be specific. So it can be very challenging to respond to vague criticism or vague feedback. So if you say this section is not clearly written, that really doesn't help the authors do better. But if you're specific and say this sentence was unclear to me, that's much more helpful. And then before you submit your review, you want to make sure you proofread it, and then be careful of your tone, especially when writing. Tone can be misinterpreted very easily. And then our peer review don'ts. So make sure that you're not rude, condescending, or belittling. This is very frustrating as an editor. It's even more frustrating as an author to get kind of negative, condescending reviews. And then also make sure that you decide to reject or accept the paper before you actually read it. So sometimes we come into these papers with a little bit of bias saying, I don't like this topic, or I don't like this author's work, or this, you have competing priorities. So I think it's really important that you keep an open mind before you start reviewing the paper. Then we want to make sure you don't share the paper with anyone without the permission of the editorial staff. Don't make any disparaging personal comments about the authors, or try to disparage their credentials or qualifications. And then this one's really important, is we try not to focus too much on copy editing, formatting, or minor grammatical errors. Most of those things are fixed in the copy editing stage. And what we really want is to evaluate the scientific merit of the paper, and not so much focus on minor grammatical errors, which are fairly common in science writing. And then don't try to rewrite the paper for the author. So sometimes we get very long reviews where it's basically, you should say this here, you should say this here, and you should say this here. And we really don't want that. You really want to evaluate the work and not kind of fix all the things that you think are wrong with the paper. And then finally, we want to make sure that you don't make a recommendation without justification. So don't just say reject with nothing, or accept without a clear explanation of why you accepted the paper or recommended acceptance. And then finally, please don't be reviewer two. I think we've all experienced reviewer two. Reviewer two is an angry, bitter person that's exacting revenge on their peers through overly critical, anonymous rejections of their papers that they secretly wish they had written. And then finally, when you make your recommendation, you have 4 options. So you can accept the paper. That means it's ready to go. On the initial submission, this is extremely rare. Most papers go through at least a minor or major revision. Sometimes papers go through 4 or 5 revisions. And then a minor revision is the paper has a few minor issues, but it's mostly ready for publication. Major revision is it has a lot of issues, but can potentially be fixed or saved by the authors. And then reject and resubmit. So this is kind of equivalent to a new submission. So that means that there's a ton of work, and there may be some large flaws that they may not be able to overcome. And then finally, reject is where if the paper has large methodologic flaws, ethical concerns, lacks originality, does not really add to the literature, doesn't have adequate sample size, or the statistical analysis is wrong. And if they did the wrong statistical analysis, you're assuming that they can't fix it in revision. And then you can also find some additional details on how to review each sections and kind of the things we expect at these links. So this top link here is for original research, and then we have a similar document for review articles. This should be attached to your invitation after you accept the offer, and then feel free to reply to the invitation or contact the editor for guidance. We are happy to help walk you guys through any steps or confusion or difficulty that you may be having. And thank you.